The United States of America will build more magnificent warships, the largest number of ships in the entire history of the United States Navy, so that America can win any future war. Donald Trump made this statement today, October 6, while speaking at the United States Navy Parade. And he added that by the end of this year, the United States will begin construction of a new Virginia-class submarine. Well, what happens next? Trump added that all previous wars, for example in Vietnam or Afghanistan, the United States lost because of political correctness. That won't happen now, so the United States will definitely win the next war. But in fact, Trump didn't say who he was planning to fight. However, increasing statements from the White House suggest Trump is preparing for war. But at the same time, he doesn't understand the modern realities of war at all and is taking the United States Army back to the last century. My name is Pechiy. Today is October 6th. Let's discuss this topic together. Why have people started talking about war so often in America? What is the Donald Trump administration preparing for? What is the Pentagon preparing for? Why are they talking about battleships and not mentioning modern war technologies at all? Before we begin, I want to remind you that on this YouTube channel, several news and analytical stories about events around the world are released every day, so that you can stay informed about absolutely everything. That's why I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel, give this episode a like, and please leave your comment under this video. So, Donald Trump and his entire team have been talking more and more about war in recent days. First, let me remind you, Trump revived the name Ministry of War. Later, United States Secretary of Defense Pechiy gathered hundreds of United States Army generals and admirals to announce to them that the United States is preparing for war. There in Quantico, Trump called on the generals to build more weapons. And so today Trump announces why the United States lost the wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan. And he declares that the United States will not make such mistakes in a future war anymore. Well, let's rewind time a little and dive into the context. Russia's war against Ukraine and the latest Russian provocations in Europe have already shown that the face of modern warfare has changed dramatically. Now, the main thing is not to have super high-tech weapons worth billions of dollars, but rather those that can be quickly upgraded and adapted to the requirements of a specific theater of operations. And since the battlefield is constantly changing, weapons must be easy to operate and, importantly, inexpensive. Because the weapons that were relevant yesterday are no longer relevant today on the battlefield in Ukraine. Even the Patriot air defense system is no longer foolproof, as some Russian ballistic missiles can now bypass it. Another episode is the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation, which Russia clearly planned to use to gain dominance in the Black Sea and quickly capture the entire south of Ukraine, including Odessa and Mykolaiv. But the large ships could not withstand the adaptive naval drones, which simply started sinking the Russian fleet. The huge unwieldy vessel could not withstand the maneuverable, relentless naval drone. Well, now take a look. This is the battleship Missouri, a masterpiece of 20th century engineering, a 270-meter monster with a displacement of 45,000 tons. Its guns were capable of firing a 1-ton shell a distance of 37 kilometers. This monster fascinated and excited people's minds. But the era of these armored giants has passed. Clumsy. Battleships gave way to small destroyers of the Arleigh-Burke type, with a displacement of only about 8,000 tons but capable of performing a whole range of tasks at the same time. Instead of guns with 1-ton shells, destroyers are equipped with Harpoon anti-ship missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, Mark 46 torpedoes, powerful close-in air defense systems, anti-aircraft missiles, and even artillery installations. All this is on one destroyer, but even the Arleigh-Burke is slowly becoming outdated. The future still belongs to unmanned sea vessels, but not for Donald Trump. At the United States Navy Parade today, Trump said the United States will build more magnificent ships than ever in Navy history. Quote, "In the field of submarines, we are 25 years ahead of any other country. No one even comes close to us. No one can compare to us." Trump also announced that in December, construction will begin on a new Virginia-class nuclear submarine. Oh, well, that's wonderful news, isn't it? But how? Many experts were shocked by another quote from Donald Trump at the Convention of United States Army Generals and Admirals last week. Trump then stated, quote, "We have a Secretary of the Navy. He came to me because I was looking at the Iowa at the dock in California. I was looking at different ships in old photographs when you look at their guns. You know, we're really considering the concept of a battleship. 6-inch armor made of steel, not aluminum, which melts if a missile hits it. Aluminum melts when the missile is 2 miles away. They don't make ships like that now. But I look at them and the minister liked this idea." Yes, my friends, you heard that right. Last week, Trump outlined the priorities for the development of the United States Armed Forces. He talked about submarines, modernizing the nuclear arsenal, and developing 6th-generation F-47 fighter jets. But the most shocking thing, Trump seriously stated that we need to return to the concept of battleships. And here, military experts are, to put it mildly, in shock. The thing is, experts openly state that the American Army is lagging behind its main competitors in the implementation of various classes of unmanned systems, claiming that this is a serious shortcoming in the United States defense strategy. But Trump sees the problem differently. Today, October 6, he stated that America was losing wars because of political correctness. Quote, "The problem with Vietnam is that we stopped fighting to win. We would have won easily. And in Afghanistan, we would have easily won any war. But we were politically correct. Now we're not politically correct, and we're winning." But actually, the problem with the United States' defeat in Vietnam wasn't political correctness, but rather a certain degree of backwardness in the army. After the defeat in Vietnam, United States President Jimmy Carter approved a new strategic concept of air-land battle, meaning a new type of warfare. It was precisely for this concept that massive, large-scale United States rearmament programs were launched. F-15 and F-16 fighters, long-range radar aircraft, A-10S Apache helicopters, Abrams tanks, Bradley vehicles, high-mobility artillery rocket systems, and Patriot air defenses. All of this weaponry ultimately became part of a unified doctrine where war is waged with high technology, speed, and a focus on precision. And the Desert Storm operation and the United States invasion of Iraq became a perfect illustration of how this concept works. Namely, the enhancement of intelligence capabilities, precision strikes on command centers, radar stations, and communication hubs, as well as total air dominance, which allowed ground forces to operate with complete superiority in firepower. In short, back then the United States learned lessons from the failure in Vietnam, focused on new technologies, moved forward, and won. But the whole problem is that the American concept of war turned out to be not entirely viable in Russia's war against Ukraine. It turned out that you can't just take air dominance out of the equation and expect the same results. No, it doesn't work like that. United States operations in the Middle East showed that the United States developed ideas, an ideal, simply perfect concept for fighting terrorism and for confronting secondary or even third-rate regional powers. But the war of the armed forces of Ukraine against the Russian occupiers showed that new approaches are needed. Even those approaches of Jimmy Carter, his military concepts, are no longer suitable. Of course, the United States is actively trying to catch up. Well, for example, in the Pentagon, they finally started talking about countering friendship. Although, wait, there's a problem here too. In July, a new doctrine for the United States Army tank platoon was introduced, and it outlines how a tank can counter a drone. And here's some shocking information. The doctrine contains instructions on aiming the main gun of the M102 Abrams tank at quadcopters. Yes, the Pentagon is suggesting that the United States Army shoot down drones with a tank shot. Okay, Americans may excel in other areas. Nothing is perfect everywhere. But instead of accepting reality at that same convention of American generals, we hear the following from Donald Trump. "I'm an aesthete and not a fan of the ships you build. They tell me, oh, it's stealth." No, it's not stealth, it's an ugly ship and we don't need it.
And now we're not building ships, and I'm not a fan of the ships you build. I'm a very aesthetic person. I don't like the ships you build. They call it stealth, but I disagree. It's not stealthy, just ugly.
Needed. At least Donald Trump likes battleships. Let's figure it out. Now it gets a bit scary. Because if we analyze which ugly ships we're talking about, we'll remember that. Okay. The United States built only one Zumwalt-class stealth destroyer. Indeed, it didn't look that great, but this project failed, and it was abandoned 7 years ago, that is, during Donald Trump's first presidency. The only ship today that partially uses stealth technology is the aforementioned Arleigh Burke. 6 of them are officially under construction right now. If Donald Trump dislikes the Arleigh Burke too, that's a failure. Why is that? Yes, because even the main adversary of the United States has admitted that the Arleigh Burke is simply the pinnacle of shipbuilding today. Now take a close look. This is the Arleigh Burke, and this is the Chinese destroyer of Project 052D, which, as you can see, is basically copied from the American one. Let's compare again. This is the Arleigh Burke, and this is the 052D. China launches 3 ships of this class per year. The Chinese Navy already has 25 of them, while the United States has 62. Arleigh Burke. Another problem is that neither Trump nor his Secretary of Defense, Hexet, are talking about the need to prepare for a new type of war. That we need to focus on new technologies, well, like those same drones. But instead, Pete Hexet says that overweight generals will be fired if they don't get themselves, as he put it, into manly shape. This is another odd episode. What if the general is overweight? That's just how it happened. But this general knows very well that it's not worth shooting down an ordinary drone costing a couple $1,000s with F-35 fighters worth $100 million or with Patriot missiles. Instead, you need to go and quickly learn from the Ukrainians how to deal with this threat. It turns out that such a general isn't needed because he's fat. I mean, he might know a lot, but he's fat. So he needs to be fired. So basically, Hexet is saying that now we'll choose generals not based on their knowledge, but on how cool they look. A real man with muscles and aviator sunglasses. Like Hyuga Boss, you know? Do you get the reference about Hyuga Boss? That's why I'll permit myself this emotional reaction. The war that Trump and Hexet are talking about is a war for the internal electorate, for appearances, for some kind of coolness. Because there is actually a struggle going on inside the United States of America against the Democrats' narratives, who, with their opposite nonsense, have really turned the army into a circus. And instead of preparing for war, Trump's team is just putting on a new circus in an attempt to get rid of the circus that the Democrats created. And at this time, the issue of rearming the United States Army is urgent, well, with basic drones. In June, President Trump issued an order to unleash American dominance in the field of drones to support the drone industry and arm United States soldiers with them. Sounds great, but the problem is that by September it became known that the order had been signed, but there are no allocated funds for microelectronics manufacturers in it, and no allocated funds for the companies that can actually produce these drones. There is no money at all. There's an order, but no money. And so Trent Emenecker, the head of the Defense Innovation Unit at the Pentagon, stated that over the past year they have purchased as many as 4,000 drone platforms. For comparison, in Ukraine, considering all drone models, some companies can produce 4,000 drones a day. The same goes for the new program to expand drone production. There's another interesting story here. As the Wall Street Journal recently wrote, the Pentagon considers the level of weapon stockpiles that the United States would have in the event of a military conflict with China to be insufficient. The Department of Defense has called on missile suppliers to double or even quadruple their production rates under an extremely tight schedule. Sources told the publication that efforts to speed up the production of necessary weapons are being carried out through a series of high-level meetings between Pentagon leadership and senior representatives of several American missile manufacturers. In the summer, the Department of Defense held a roundtable with leading missile suppliers where they discussed speeding up ammunition production. There, weapons manufacturers were asked to detail how they could increase production by 2 to 5 times compared to current volumes. With the measures that will be implemented over the next 6, 18, and 24 months, the military also asked suppliers to describe how they could attract new private capital and potentially license their technology to third-party manufacturers. But the problem is that no money has been allocated for this production acceleration. In principle, $25 billion is allocated for 5 years. And not all companies in the United States are willing to take the risk of expanding production lines until they are sure that the government will definitely buy all the weapons produced. But instead, we heard from Trump and Hexet that from now on, there is no place for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender representatives in the American Army. Here's what Hexet said. Here's the quote. No more identity months, no more offices for inclusivity and equality, no more guys in women's dresses, no climate agenda, no divisions, and no delusional gender ideas. I've already said it, and I'll say it again. This crap is over. In general, I want to believe that Trump Hexet is not doing it publicly, but they really are preparing their army for war. So far, publicly, all we hear about are Donald Trump's battleships, which turn out to be the coolest ever in history, and Pete Hexet's fight against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. I'll leave it at that. Write your opinion in the comments. How much is the United States really preparing for war, or is this just rhetoric for the voters? Leave your comments, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.